Hello and welcome to Board Game Bonkers. This is the hot Meeples. Maybe I shouldn't have introduced it like that because I'm not hot. But anyway, what I'm talking about is hot topics that have come from the board game industry, from the likes of Board Game Geek, Reddit, Q&As and interviews. And joining me is Sarah Shea from Board Games in a Minute. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, and what we're going to be doing, just to explain to our viewers out there, we're going to be pulling out three hot topics from this bowl. Now, we have no idea what is going to be coming out, so we haven't planned or prepared for this, and we'll be giving our viewpoint as objectively as we can, and spend about 5 to 10 minutes in each of those topic areas that are contentious and lots of discussions going around on the internet and different forums and Q&As. And we also cover some of these topic areas and under the Meeple Light Show, which you can check out by going to the playlist. I'm also putting in the description down below a link to Sarah's channel to check out Board Games in a Minute. So, Sarah, shall we just dive straight into the first one?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, why not? Okay, so let's see which topic comes out first. So, our very first topic is there a lack of consideration for colorblind players in game design? So do you want to start us off? What do you think?
Sure, I can start us off. I think a lot of the big publishers have started to consider it more and more. So, I've seen it come up on in discussion forums a lot, and I think nowadays most big publishers, it's something that they keep in the back of their mind. And I've seen most board games have a way for colorblind players to be able to distinguish things, whether that's just not having just the color, but also some kind of pattern as well that can help them to distinguish different meeples or different kinds of cards and so on. I think smaller publishers, maybe who aren't as active in discussion forums, might not be aware that it's a thing that they need to be conscious of, but I feel like big publishers all know about it now.
Yeah, I think there's been improvements. I don't think, I know this was mentioned in, I think, one of the Under the Meeple Lights topics where people don't deliberately design a game thinking that I'm going to create a game that's going to, exclude colorblind people. And the problem is there's actually so many different types of colorblind people. Now, I remember being on a podcast and talking about this, and I actually wrote a blog, and I looked at all the different colour blindness and looked at colours that could be used in board games and wrote a blog. It's actually, I've still got it. I think it's on the Pixie Games website. It's a blog I wrote specifically looking at the colour palettes and how game designers can just use that colour palette and it'll tell them what colour blindness it links to and how they can kind of reduce the likelihood of excluding certain colour blindness. It is difficult and almost nigh impossible to exclude and to try and look at creating a game that caters for every single colour blindness because that's impossible. But there are ways we can reduce the impacts. For example, those who are colourblind with black and white, black and red, for example, then we can look at how do we reduce and make it more accessible by taking away perhaps one of those colours, maybe the red or the black, so at least it's accessible to those players. So there are ways around it, but I don't think people deliberately go and design a game thinking I'm going to create a game that's going to exclude all these colorblind people. But it's difficult at the same time to try and create a game, especially a colorful game that looks at different color palettes. And one way designers can look around that is the different depths within the shades of color that can help colorblind people to differentiate between, is it a yellow, is it an orange, is it a green? And I'm looking at red or a black here. So there are ways around it. And it's just designers being a bit conscious of that. But I don't think anyone deliberately creates a game to exclude people.
Yeah, I don't think so either. At least I hope not. Yeah.
Now, I think there's a couple of games which I think, if you obviously you would want to say Clear or Sagrada, games like that, which would be nigh impossible to play if colorblind. But I think there is an improvement. If you look at games that were designed, I suppose games 20 years ago, they were quite, especially Euro games, quite bland, quite beige. So a little bit easier for players to kind of grasp and colour blindness because they're quite bland and boring. But as we've developed through game design, they become a bit more vibrant through colours. And it's just be conscious of that and how do we create board games as accessible as possible. And one way around that, when I was looking at colour blindness, is actually the shades, using different shades of of colour makes a huge difference to colour blindness. But it is difficult to try and create a game, especially a colourful game that caters for everyone. You just can't do that. It's impossible. But there are ways we can make a contribution if designers just consider the aspects of shading in their colour palettes. But it'll be interesting to see how many games people actually own that they struggle to actually recognize some of the colors on the board, for example, of the cars. It'd be interesting to see that. I don't think I own any that there's some that I struggle because I'm colorblind myself. And but I generally am okay. I can actually see the color palettes. I can recognize the colors. It's when they use different shades or types of shades that I can't differentiate, which makes it quite difficult, particularly shades of yellow and orange, where I'm struggling to differentiate unless it's very bright yellow or a dark orange, in which case it's a lot easier. But I can't think of a game where I 100% can't see the colours. A couple I might struggle. It'll be interesting to see if our viewers have any games that they struggle to play because of the colour palettes. So we'll see whether anyone actually comments to say, well, actually, this game is a nightmare to play because of my colour blindness in this area. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think designers do a good job of designing games and not excluding different colour blindness, but I think perhaps a little bit could be done in terms of the colour shading and the palettes they use. But it'd be interesting to see if any game designers got their viewpoints on it as well. I don't really dwell on it too much, but there's a podcast. I will put the link in the description down below where I actually talked about different palettes, color schemes, different color blindness, and what designers can do to try and help people into gaming more that are colorblind and make it more accessible. So we'll move into our next topic of discussion, Sarah, and we'll see what comes out there. So our second one is, if I can open it, because I folded these about 5 times. There we go. We got it. Is there enough mainstream news about the board game industry? Do you want to start us off?
Mainstream news. I think that they're starting to pick up on the board game industry a bit more and more. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there was like an article in the New York Times about some of the best board games. I think, now and then different news outlets will do a story on, the board game industry. I mean, obviously it's not very prevalent. It's not like they're writing articles every week about the board game industry. But I think, especially since the pandemic, I think, since lockdown happened back in 2020, I think more news outlets picked up on, the board game industry and did research on it and realized how big it is. But of course, it's not something that you're going to see often in the news. And I think it's still not as widely known as it could be.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because there's a lot of online articles about lists of the top, like you say, top 10 board games, and a lot of them are still quite the basic games. Usually, you'll see Ticket to Ride and games like that that are quite popular, especially in the US and in local stores. In the UK, it's a little bit different because I'm still a big believer that there's a lot of people living in the cave years when it comes to board games because they just don't have a modern understanding of the gaming world and what it's like. And unfortunately, you still see lists with, very old games that came out in the 1930s and 40s still in lists, which I find frustrating. So I think it's moved on in some countries, America, Germany, but I think when you come to places like the UK, what I see is still behind some parts of the world. So I'm not sure. I mean, in America, do you see anything actually on the news or on TV being discussed around board games?
I've seen certain board games just kind of appear in TV shows. Like there was Killing Eve, in which I think that one episode they were playing Dixit. Um, I think there was a actor who said that he's a fan of Wingspan. Um, but for the most part, no. For the most part, I feel like there was a show I watched recently, and the characters were hiding out in a house somewhere, and it was just all these old classic games like Candyland and Monopoly and Scrabble, and I'm like, come on, like if they're hiding out in this house for God knows how long. Oh yeah, it was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, if I remember correctly. The new show on Amazon, I think. And I was like, they didn't even put any good board games that they would actually want to play. I think that was the TV show, if I remember correctly. At least I wouldn't want to play those board games. So I think that I feel like these people who are in charge of these TV shows need to do more research on the board game world when they actually, pop in a board game somewhere.
Yeah, I see that sometimes. I remember when I was sitting watching a film with Tim, and I'll be like, why on earth have they got that board game in the shop? Why? Why? It's so old. Nobody plays it anymore. Or, certain families will play it, but certainly not actually board gamers. I think it's interesting because I don't think we'll ever get to a stage where it becomes big mainstream. I don't think we'll ever get to that stage because it's quite a niche market still. And it almost reminds me of, so I was kind of brought up in the rave, happy, hardcore scene, and that was very underground. So it wasn't commercial, but still in the 90s, you had commercial songs in the top 100 in the charts. And I remember the box, it was like the streaming channel where, music videos were shown, and you had kind of some classic hardcore songs that were played in there, but it's very much underground. Wasn't commercial. It's still deemed underground. It's still not commercial. It never will be because it's just that is what it's like. It's very niche, that music style, just like the board game industry is quite niche for a lot of people. And unfortunately, in the UK, we still get the commercial, tacky Hasbro games that are on supermarket shelves, Monopoly, 3%. I'm not knocking them. That's fine if people want to play them, but I always say to people when they mention, about I've got all these versions of Monopoly. I think it's better games than Monopoly, and
Yeah.
it's because they haven't been exposed to it. And if that's what they see in TV and that's what they actually see on the supermarket shelves, then unfortunately that's what they're going to pick because that's all they know about. But you're right. I don't think TV producers do a lot of them do enough research and know about the board game industry. Just like I think a lot of shops around the world and kind of local coffee shops still don't do enough research. I've got a local coffee shop. They've got a large Connect Four. Great, that's great for 5 minutes of fun. Fine, I haven't got an issue with that. But then looking at Conan, you've got Monopoly and Uno, and I think, come on,
Yeah,
you've
well, that's why I would not like go to a coffee shop and rely on their game collection. Like I've gone to numerous bubble tea shops in my area, and the bubble tea shops always try to stock a few games as well. And they're just games that I just would not want to play. So if I'm going to, spend time in a bubble tea shop or a coffee shop, I'm going to take my own games with me. Yeah.
good advice. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what other people see in their own country because I'm sure we've got viewers from different countries and what they actually see on TV or perhaps media. Perhaps they are seeing a lot more traction in their countries. Be interesting then with from Germany sees a lot of media around board games because obviously board gaming is quite big in Germany. So it'd be interesting to see what our viewers see in their own country. So shall we dive in to our final topic and we'll see what comes out?
Yeah.
Right, let's dive in. So our third and final one is, has the board game industry reached the tipping point? Now, I
I
don't,
think so. I
yeah,
mean that's an open-ended question, the tipping point for what, So, but I feel like it has like I'm going to approach it from two different aspects. I guess, number one, in terms of the prices and Kickstarters, I feel like a lot of people are fatigued. I feel like a lot of people, including myself, are not backing as many games as they used to because prices have increased. There's so many games coming out every year. If you are conscious of, trying not to go in debt, you're not going to back every game anymore. Like I remember back there, years ago, there was a time where I was just trying to back everything. And I just can't do that anymore. Like there's just too many games coming out. You just don't have the money to back every single game that's coming out. So in terms of that, I think we've definitely reached a tipping point where games are not being fun, backed as much as they used to be. And then in terms of design, like how many new innovative designs or themes, like mechanics or themes, can you come up with at this point? I feel like every theme that is possible has probably been done at this point, right? Like I feel like there's a game that exists about every theme that you can think of at this point. And they're just all going to be some variation of mechanics at this point. And every mechanic you can think of, I feel like has come out in board games. And you have multiple board games that now utilize different kinds of mechanics. And that's another reason I think we've reached the tipping point. Like games just, if they're just okay, they're just not going to cut it anymore. Like the other day I played a game and which was published by a reputable publisher, and I just thought it was such an unremarkable game that I could not even understand why it was even published. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, seriously, like there's other games that have this theme that are so much more interesting, so much better in my opinion. The mechanics are better. It's a better, more enjoyable experience that I just could not understand why this game had been published at all. So I feel like we as consumers are also going to become more and more critical of games, and hopefully that will push publishers to reevaluate just deciding to publish everything that comes to them. Like I just could not understand why this game had been published, in my opinion. So yeah, so I think we've definitely reached a tipping point as people become more conscious of spending. Yeah.
There's an interesting discussion because, I mean, 2 years ago, I think the average was around 6,000 games, board games that were released, which is an obscene amount.
Yes.
I don't know what the stats and statistics are in 24, but so a couple of years ago was the average, the predicted around 6,000. It's based on lots of data that they looked at. Um, and there's a place where you can actually get the data in the board game industry. It looks at, the average sales of the games, how many are released in countries, etc. It looks at full in-depth data. I can't remember where it came from. But it was interesting because before that, if you go back even a number of years, it wasn't quite 6,000, it was around 4,000. So it has grown to a point. But I think anything, it doesn't matter where it's social media, it doesn't matter where it's to do with chocolate or any other industry. When you get a tipping point and you get to the peak of it, eventually it has to come down. It has to crash at some point. And I think perhaps we're now getting to that point where it's starting to trickle down. And I think there'll be a point where what usually happens is it gets level. I think we'll get to that point where it kind of steadies itself for a while and then either be a lot peak and then a drop again. I think that'll happen. And I think a lot depends on the media, how much
Mhm.
interest it is worldwide. I think it depends on the amount of content that's out there online as well to make it is more available to people. But I think, yeah, there is a point where we are getting to the end now, and I think we are seeing a decline. Like you said, there's less people backing games, and maybe who used to do it throughout the years are now taking a step back. And I think we've gotten to a point where I'd argue a lot of games are too over convoluted. I think they are trying to come up with innovative ways, but I think sometimes it's using a mesh of mechanisms slashed together. And I think sometimes when they're trying to come up with innovative ideas, I think everything's been done. It's just doing something a slightly different way that was done before, which might be a little bit strange to some people. So there are a number of games as well, I think, just get released for the sake of getting released because it's a money grab, and that happens, unfortunately, which is why we rely on reviews because then we know if a game's rubbish and not worth getting, or a game is great and worth getting. But I think we've got a point where I think we're going to start seeing a decline, and naturally, because the cost of living, the cost of products is more, so the cost of manufacturing is more, the cost of shipping is more. So we'll start seeing a decline because people can't afford it, and naturally, that's what happens. And I think we'll get a level playing field, but I don't think we'll be at this peak for much longer. I think we're starting to see it going down, and I think we will see some people stop buying board games because they can't afford it and being content with what they got. Because I think we got a point where people were just buying games, a ridiculous amount of games, playing it once or twice, getting another game, playing it once or twice, getting another game, and actually spending time with that board game, which I'm guilty of going into that trap. And I've decided, you know what, I might still buy board games every month, but and reinvest in the games I've already bought to play them 6 or 8 times before I play another game. And I'm quick to move games on. If I don't like it, I'll move it on straight away. But you're right, there are some games that are horrendous that still come out in market because they just want to make money. Unfortunately, that happens. There's nothing original or new about it. But people get bored. Humans get bored. So we go through a psychological cycle, what's called every 6 to 8 years, humans will eventually change. So their thought processes will change. What they like will slightly change. Not drastic change, but a slight change. So what they liked 6, 8 years ago might be different to what they like now. So unless we look at ways in how we change how we deliver board games or how they're actually, I suppose, coming up with innovative ways and how they actually work and play out, people will get bored, because if they're just playing the same thing all the time with the same type of mechanisms, there's nothing new and original, people get bored, and eventually we'll get to that point of stop buying board games because there's nothing different about them.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to yeah, see where this goes, and whether, I think we'll see a point. I think it's now starting to decline. I think, how far does it decline? I think that's the question. I mean, nobody knows because I haven't got a magic ball, but I think it will decline to a point of we won't have as many games being released as we did. I think it will come to a point, it will start to trickle down, um, and get to a more reasonable, because you can't keep up. There's too many games to get released, but I think it will drop down quite significantly. So it'll be interesting to see what the stats say on how many board games get released each year, and whether we do see a decline as your cat wants
Yeah.
to join.
This one is Zaytoon. I adopted him from one of the colonies that I take care of every day. So I see
Oh.
his father every day. Zaytoon means olive in Arabic.
Ah.
Yeah, I thought he should make an appearance since he's been making so much racket in the background.
Hey.
Yeah, he's still.
So, well, I wonder, just while we've got a cat, what's your favorite cat game? Have you got a cat game that you like?
Oh my gosh, there's so many cat games, right? Um, I mean, I really like Isle of Cats. I don't think I have too many cat games actually. I have this one game which is called it's a so the cat is just a meeple in the game. It's called Runica and the Six-Sided Spellbooks, and there's a cool cat meeple in that game. I'm trying to think of what other games I have that have cats in them. Oh my gosh.
Is it, I've played at Isle of Cat, so we had the designer on, because he's from Bristol, so we had the designer on under the Meeple lights. Uh,
Yeah.
and I played it. I wasn't a huge fan of, I'm not a fan of tiling games anyway, so it doesn't matter what tiling game I played, I probably wouldn't like them. But I liked how quite thematic it was. It's one of the few tiling games that were quite thematic.
I
The rest,
think I like the follow-up game a bit more, Race to the Raft, where it's a cooperative game where you're trying to get the cats to safety from fires which are on the island. I think I actually enjoy that more than Isle of Cats, to be honest. But I don't know if I have many cat-themed games. I can't think of any. I'll have to go through and make a list. I don't know.
just top five or top 10 or something. So
Yeah.
that brings us to the end. So it'll be interesting to see what our viewers think, and let us know in the comments down below what your viewpoints are on these topics. And certainly there's quite a few threads around about some of these topics. It'd be interesting to see whether, particularly about the decline in the board game industry, do you feel we're actually at a decline? Particularly with Kickstarter or other crowdfunding platforms. So that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me.
Thank
And
you.
we will continue this on a monthly basis, bringing 3 hot topics on the board game industry. Now, if you haven't already done so, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Please check out Sarah's channel. I'll put the link in the description down below, and please give this video a like as well if you've enjoyed it. And until next time, take care.
Bye.
This is Bonkers.